The history of slavery in the U.S. At the beginning of its history, the United States was a very different place than it is today. The beginning of the United States history has a lot of darkness, conflict, and pain. This presentation explains one chapter in our history, the slavery of African Americans. The Triangular Trade, 1600s and 1700s. Do you recognize this map? This map shows the Atlantic Ocean. It shows Europe. This is England right here. Down here, this is Africa, South America, North America, and these are the Caribbean islands. This map shows the path of boats that used to travel for business in the 1600s and 1700s. The boats started in England here and in other parts of Europe. They went to West Africa to buy people who were kidnapped. So they, along the coast, they had business with people who would sell kidnapped Africans, and they would take those on their boats. They took the kidnapped Africans to North America and the Caribbean islands. They sold the African people there and bought sugar, tobacco, and alcohol. So here, the African people got off the boat, and the people who owned the boat bought sugar and tobacco and other things that were wanted in Europe. Then they sailed their boats back to Europe, and they would sell those things here, tobacco, cotton, and sugar. So that's why they call this the triangular trade. They had 3 stops along the way. Slave ships. A ship is a big boat, and one boat usually held hundreds of African slaves. The trip across the Atlantic Ocean took 2 to 3 months. Let's talk about the conditions on the slave ships. We didn't have any cameras at this time, so we don't have any photographs. But this is one person's drawing of a slave ship. So you can see that this is like the floor of the ship, and outside here, people were working. They kept the African people in a very small place, which was below the floor. And then underneath there, they have some food and water and other things. So as you can see, this is a difficult way to travel. They were very crowded, and they didn't have much space. This is another person's drawing of how they put the slaves in the ships. The slaves had to lie down next to each other, and they couldn't move. They spoke many different languages and often couldn't understand each other's talk. And there was no place to go to the bathroom in this ship. Many slaves died and were thrown into the ocean, and this is easy to understand because it wasn't clean. They didn't get to move or get normal exercise. It was really a terrible conditions for them. Let's talk about the slave markets. When those ships arrived in America, they went to a place like this. You can see this is a businessman. He has a African woman here, and he's trying to sell this woman. And these are the farmers. They're thinking about if they want to buy, how much money they want to pay for her. So this is an example of a slave market. When the slaves arrived to America, they were sold as property to white Americans. The life of a slave. So this drawing shows some slaves working in a cotton field. When they arrived at their farms, these Africans, now African Americans, they were forced to work. They worked long days and very hard jobs. They didn't receive any pay, and they couldn't leave their jobs. You can see here these men are working on some sugar cane. Many slaves worked on farms for sugar cane. And the overseers, do you remember the word overseer? This is an overseer and this is an overseer. These overseers carried whips. What's he carrying there? Do you see it? The name of this thing is a whip. They could hit the slaves if they thought they weren't working hard enough. Now, the modern camera was invented in the 1830s. At that time, someone used a camera to take a picture of an African American slave. This is a real photograph of a real man. It was taken right at the beginning when cameras were a new technology. Can you imagine what this man's life was like? This picture shows one of the worst parts about slavery. Owners could sell slaves at any time, and they often separated families. They often sold fathers away from their wives and children, and sometimes they separated mothers and their children too. This is an article from a newspaper. If a slave ran away from the farm, the owner usually posted an advertisement like this in the newspaper. So this owner gives the name of his slave, Henry May. And he gives a description of him, and he says, if you find him, and bring him back to me, I will give you money. People in the community tried to catch the slaves and bring them back to their farms. So that's a long story. That's a very difficult story. And I want to spend a little bit of time just thinking about this. I have some questions for you. Write your answers on a piece of paper, and I want you to bring that paper to our next class. Here are the questions. Did you know all of this information before? If not, what is something that you learned here that you didn't know before? Number 2, slavery is a terrible system. In your opinion, what is the most terrible part of it? And number 3, what is one question that you have about this topic? I can't wait to talk about this with you in our next class. But for the moment, pause the video, write down your answers, and thanks. I think we're going to have a good discussion about this.